Welcome to Life Plus Homeschooling. Today we're talking about the reluctant writer, a fascinating topic, and we're here with Kim Kautzer from Write Shop, and she's going to tell us a little bit not only about how to help a reluctant writer, but a little bit about your own story as well. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Kim, before we get started, tell our audience a little bit about yourself. When did you start homeschooling? How did you get into the homeschooling movement?
I started homeschooling in the late 80s, and it was a time when there wasn't a lot of homeschooling going on. And my daughter actually was the one who approached me and said, "Mom, can we homeschool?" It's like, well, why not? So we started homeschooling. My youngest was still a preschool-aged child, but my middle daughter was wondering, why can't I homeschool too if you're going to homeschool my sister? So I just kind of jumped into it. I love to be creative, and it just was an easy choice for me. And I thought, we'll just try it for this year. It was, 1 year.
Right. Now, how many children do you have?
I have 3 children.
Okay.
And so we started homeschooling in the 80s and really loved it. Just got very involved in the homeschooling movement and just decided that was a lifestyle for our family.
So now you have boys or girls?
I have 2 older girls and then a boy.
Okay. Now tell me something that you just absolutely love. Now, obviously, your children are all done with homeschooling,
Yes.
and I hear you're a grandmother.
I am.
And so what was your favorite memory of homeschooling?
Immediately what jumped into my mind was my daughter dressed up with a doily on her head and like a little nightgown cover, thing that she was wearing of mine, and my son wearing his pirate hat, like a 3-corner tricorn, and dressed with a little vest, dumping my Tupperware box of tea bags off the upstairs landing as we were reenacting the Boston Tea Party.
Oh, how fun.
And just prior to that, we'd had a big tea party. It was our last hurrah. We had baked scones and had tea, and we did a lot of unit studies, and it was just really a fun way to, have our last hurrah before we couldn't drink tea anymore. And we went on a tea fast as part of our schooling.
Oh, wow, how fun. You can't remake those memories.
No, you can't.
Those are fascinating. Okay, but today we're talking about reluctant writers.
Yes.
So first, tell me, what is a reluctant writer?
A reluctant writer is your deer in the headlights kind of child who looks at a piece of paper and can't think of anything to say. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to write about. How long does it have to be? I hate writing. And they cry, they argue, they freeze when they see that page in front of them.
Now, how many homeschooling parents deal with reluctant writers, do you think?
A lot.
Okay.
A lot. If they don't have all reluctant writers, most families have at least one.
Okay.
But it's very, very common, especially among boys.
Okay. Now, what age of a child does that typically, do you begin to see that?
The reluctance?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because it can start young depending on how much pressure parents puts on a child thinking that her child should perform. And having homeschooled for 15 years, and having homeschooled for a long time, been a product of homeschooling yourself, that at a certain point you just can't follow the public school agenda.
Right, the model. It doesn't work at home, does it?
And so if you're trying to force a child who's not ready into doing something he's not ready for, it will create that problem. But on the other hand, if you have a child who's young and hasn't been trained in the process of writing by the time they get to be junior high or high school, and you say, okay, I'm serious about teaching writing now, and then all of a sudden you're introducing them to things like brainstorming and editing, they want no part of it. And
so then what would you say is the perfect age to start a child on the basics of writing?
You can start them as young as kindergarten.
Okay. Now, what would that look like?
With a kindergartner, you're talking about teaching them how to plan a simple 5-sentence story that maybe it would be about a topic like a train. Okay, well, let's think about that. If you were a train in the mountains, what might be something that would happen to you? And you just write down their answers and you help them. They're not doing the writing at kindergarten, but they're doing the thinking and talking, and you're teaching them the thinking process. When you're editing with a kindergartner or a first grader, you're not red penning that entire paper. You're saying, do we have periods at the ends of each of our sentences? Did we start each sentence with a capital letter? Right. Good. Okay, then we're done. Our story's great. We can put it on the refrigerator, and it's your handwriting, and things like that. So you can start very early with very simple things.
Now, what does a stumbling block for children who are reluctant? What is their stumbling blocks? What's causing this fear or...
As you get into the middle elementary ages and starting to move up to junior high and so forth, you're starting to find problems like kids lack confidence. They don't know what the boundaries of an assignment are. If it's too vague, they don't know what you expect, and therefore they don't have something to aim for, and they flounder.
Fear of failing.
Well, yeah, it's like, well, how long does it have to be? And is it a story? Is it a description? Is it a personal, is it a report? Is it a paragraph? Is it a page? And all these things just terrify children. So that's one. Another thing that keeps them stuck is they don't have the tools for writing. Okay. They don't know how to brainstorm. They don't know how to go through a paper and edit it and look for things. Writing feels really subjective. And most people think it's subjective, and you can really make it much more objective for the student and for the parent who's editing and grading. Laziness, procrastination, perfectionism, these all play into reluctance.
Which children tend to have some of all of that.
A big one is fear of parent criticism.
Oh, yeah. I know when I was teaching one daughter specifically writing, fear of failing her mom was her biggest fear. And it was really, and we overcame that with just giving very, very clear directive. Yes. This is what I'm expecting. I can help you work through it. This is the number of words.
This is so smart.
And it really did then take down those walls, and she felt very confident that she could. Yeah. Even if it wasn't a great first time, it met what I was looking for. So, okay, so now this is something you talk about because it's something personal. Did you have a reluctant writer?
I did. And I didn't realize it until we were in the throes of it, because it was my son who was my youngest. Now my girls, because they were already starting homeschooling after having been in the public school for a couple of years, I could give them their daily assignment and off they went. They just didn't need me much except to teach them a new concept if they had questions. I mean, I'd sit there with them and work, but they were very independent, and they were intuitive writers like their mom. Well, here comes Ben up the pike, and he can't sit still to save his life. He fidgets at the table. He drops his pencil all day long. He can't work independently. He didn't learn to read till he was almost 7, but he didn't read chapter books till he was 11. And by the time he was going into junior high and was still not writing on his own, I was at my wit's end. And so I totally understand when moms say, I have a reluctant writer.
Now, that tends to be more common with boys.
It does.
So how do you address that when you're working with a boy when he's 7, 8, 9 years old and just struggling to read? How do you work with that?
There are a couple of things that you can do, and things that I sort of fell into by accident because it felt right to me, but I've since discovered that that's actually a tried and true method, and that is to let them dictate to you. Oh. And Ben dictated much of his writing to me until he was probably 11 or 12.
Okay. So you let him brainstorm, come up with all the ideas,
and he was very verbal. As a matter of fact, in high school he went into speech and debate through homeschool.
Right.
And it was his niche. That was where he shone. But he could spin a yarn, but you couldn't ask him to write it down. And one of the problems with kids is if they're perfectionists or if they're just reluctant. It's like we talk about all these great words that he could use, and then I'd say, which one do you want? Which one do you want to choose? Which one is shortest to spell? It's like, oh, fine, we've just picked all these great vocabulary words you could use in your story, and you want the short one? Because even the physical act of writing was torturous for him. So taking dictation and letting your child copy it afterwards, you could either type it out or intentionally leave some mistakes so that they have something that they can work on during the editing process. Right. And another thing that you can do with reluctant writers is teach them break it down into steps. You don't have to do it all in one sitting.
It's a fantastic idea on letting them dictate. I mean, you're right. The worst thing that comes to them is this idea that they have to put pen to paper and do so many things at once. They have to think about it, figure out what they want to write, then put it down, worry about their spelling and all that.
Exactly. And by then, the thought has dissipated.
Yes. So now what else, as he progressed, how did you get him from dictation to writing himself?
Well, my friend Debbie and I decided we would teach a homeschool co-op class we had been doing that anyway, but we were teaching fun things like
Right.
geography and world cultures, and those were the fun things to teach. And we'd cook and we'd bake and we'd make maps and go on field trips. She wanted us to do a writing class because her son struggled too. And it's like, are you kidding me? I don't want to teach writing. It sounds so boring. And as it turned out, it was a great thing for us to do. It ended up not being boring. It was a lot of fun. But on the first day of class, we discovered it was just not our own boys who were wrestling, but this entire class of 14 kids, 12 of whom were boys.
Wow.
Whose writing was as bad or worse than our own sons. And they were all in that middle school age.
So this really is a something that's common in
Yes.
homeschooling. So I'm thinking our audience that is listening is just completely relating
Oh,
to
totally.
your story.
Totally.
So what are the secrets to motivating your children to writing? I mean, it's great to start at the young age with the dictation, but how do you motivate them to keep going?
Well, one of the things that we did through this class and what eventually became our curriculum was we began with writing games. So that's something that breaks the ice for the kids. And oftentimes the games have no writing at all. They're things that you can do orally that either expand vocabulary or even something like Scrabble or Boggle that you can do. We'll play 10 minutes of a word game just to get the cobwebs dusted out. And so playing, and that's really, really important at the very young ages.
Okay.
We do a lot of
Games
and things to teach them skills.
Yeah.
They think they're playing, but they're learning.
Right.
So that's one really important way to get them motivated.
And then where do you take them from playing games? Is brainstorming the next step?
Yes, then they go
Okay.
into brainstorming and they learn that they don't have to just sit down with the blank page and pour out the thoughts that are in their mind, but that brainstorming helps them come up with ideas and details, helps them to be more organized, helps them have a focus so they don't take tangents, and they feel contained. It's a safety net for children, just like if you put them on a playground and there's a fence, they feel comfortable to go to the entire edge of the playground. But
Right.
if you take the fence away, they huddle in the middle. They don't know where they can go because they don't feel safe.
Right.
Giving them boundaries of brainstorming and organizing helps.
So now within those boundaries, do you give them, here's the subjects that they can write about, or do you let them just take their interest and write about, how important is that?
It's
their
very
interests?
important for them to write about things that inspire them and that
Okay.
excite them.
Okay.
Even if it begins to bore you, that your daughter, every time she can describe a horse saddle, she can talk about how to curry a horse. She can talk about her first experience jumping with a horse. And finally you're saying, enough with horses, but no, if that's what's motivating her writing, let her do that. What I like to suggest to parents is pick a general goal for your lesson. Let's say you want to teach them to describe an object. So then within that, give them some freedom and flexibility to choose the object of their choice, rather than say, write about anything you want.
Right.
Because instead, that has the opposite effect for most children. And it
It's
sends
those
them,
boundaries that aren't there.
exactly.
Yeah. So would you say, say it's our 9-year-old boy, would you say, and we know he's very interested in Legos and Star Wars, and in different, he's interested in little baby birds right now. So would you kind of look around with what's interesting him at that moment that he's active in and say, let's just start with that.
You really could.
know.
You could say, for instance, with the bird, you could say, let's watch this bird out our window, because like we have a bird bath, and we can see the little birds gathering out there. And we can say, let's watch him. While we're watching him, let's make notes about how it looks. Okay, so look at the bird, and if you've got questions or things you can guide them with, what do you notice about its size? What about the shape of its beak? Is it pointy? Is it hooked?
Yeah.
What colors does it have? What's red and blue? Well, is it just red and blue? Let's look in our thesaurus and see if we can find some better words for red and blue. And then you can help draw more out of them. And as they get older, they can actually have an organizing worksheet that asks them those questions. They can actually look at the object and answer the questions so that they're way prepared by the time it's time to start writing.
Right. How important is reading in order to produce a good writer?
I always think reading is critical.
Yeah.
But parents come to us all the time and say, my kids love to read and can't write. So it doesn't always mean they go hand in hand.
Okay.
But a good reader will always have a stronger vocabulary, a stronger love of words, and a little bit more intuitive sense of the way words should be placed together. So
Right.
even though they're not enjoying writing, it's oftentimes because they just haven't learned the tools to do it yet.
Okay.
But once they start, their reading plays into it.
Okay.
And I saw that a lot with my girls.
What do you have a favorite story that you remember one of your children writing that just still to this day sticks out in your head?
The one that just pops into my mind would be when my middle daughter was writing an essay in high school, and she had to actually write a story, and I'm trying to remember even what the basic assignment was, but she wrote a narrative about a Civil War, a guy who defected.
Wow.
And met somebody in the woods, and just the whole scenario of that, and then it ended up he went back to his company before he was missed, and ended up not defecting at all.
Right.
And it was a fascinating story, but it was written like a novel, like a little chapter from a novel. It was just great, and it was so fun to see that, even though she was not my reluctant writer.
Right.
It was just nice to be able to watch her writing emerge too, and that's something that parents need to know, that it's not just reluctant writers who need tools. But if you have a motivated, articulate child who needs direction, it's those girls you have to watch for who will just ramble and go on, take tangents, and they need direction too.
So now let's go back to your son for a second, because you were telling me before we came on what he does now.
Yes.
And I mean, I was thinking, did you even, and first tell our audience where he is now and what he's doing.
Okay, so my son, the struggling writer, is now almost 27. He lives in England, and he is married to a lovely British woman, and so they make their home in England. He's getting his PhD in theology.
Now, would you have wondered if he could ever have done that
Never.
in those early years, 7, 8, 9, 10,
Never.
when he could not write?
He was bright, and he was organized, and he could talk,
Right.
but we didn't see reading and writing skills, and so we were concerned about his future in academics. So we
Right.
started wondering, what kind of trade he might be able to do, and he wasn't very handy, so I don't know how that was all going to play out. But God has a plan that we don't always see, and he sees over the hills we can't see over. And my job as a mom was to be faithful to my son and to keep looking for things that taught him, that worked, that addressed his bent. And I knew that he was bright and smart, but he wasn't getting it the traditional way.
Right.
And so eventually, when he got into high school and things started to click for him, it was a mixture. I mean, it's not just the writing that I taught him in junior high, but he became a Boy Scout, became an Eagle Scout. He got very involved in homeschool speech and debate, which was wonderful for his writing skills, because it taught him research and thinking skills and logic. And now he's
Getting his PhD.
I mean, he just talks and writes circles around me. I can't. It takes me a dictionary and 2 hours to read a paragraph.
Oh my
that he
goodness.
writes. But
So now, what if you have a creative child who doesn't want to write at all? Are there alternatives for that?
yes, and these were some of the things I did with Ben when he was young,
Okay.
And with my girls too. Actually, even though they weren't reluctant.
Right.
So you can. A writing project doesn't mean it has to be a 5-paragraph essay. A writing project can be something that accompanies an art project, a music project, a geography, maps, so they can write a short report about something, then they can use their artistic skills to develop a mural or make a scrapbook.
Right.
We did a scrapbook in high school. Ben had to write little things, like he had to do a 3-day journal as George Washington. And then that was
Fascinating.
part of, he just wrote as George Washington in this journal. He had to discuss the Thomas Jefferson version of the Bible. And so there were just different things that he did that were writing assignments, but meanwhile he was collecting photographs and other maps, charts, things from the
Right.
period that he could put in his scrapbook
Right.
for this American period scrapbook. So things like that they can.
Well, this has been so fascinating. You're a delight to have. We thank you for coming. And where can our audience find more information about your resources from Write Shop?
They can go to writeshop.com, or they can go to my blog, writeshop.com/blog, where I blog about writing and encouraging parents and tips and things that they can.
It's been so wonderful having you.
Thanks for having me.